You're watching Orientation to GP Supervision. Everything you need to know about becoming a GP Supervisor. Produced by GP Supervision Australia. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, future, and their families.
I'd like to welcome everyone who has joined. My name is Srishti Duta. I'm the chair of the GPSA board currently and also a supervising GP. Now, I'd like to start with inviting our panelists to tell us a little bit about themselves and what the many hats that they wear currently are, starting with Dr. Nichols.
Yeah, no worries. So my name's Karen Nichols. I'm a Torres Strait Islander woman, GP by trade, and currently working in the academic space as a senior lecturer in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. I have a couple of other hats that I wear. So that's one of my jobs. My other job is with the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association as a medico-cultural lead. I also am the chair of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Council at RACGP. And do some other sort of representative stuff, some stuff for other colleges as well, dare I share. It's a lot, but it's very much worthwhile. I'm a mum to a fur baby as well. He's my favourite child, and I say that quite openly. My other three have accepted that as well. It's their favourite sister. So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Nicole, do you want to go next?
Yeah, look, I'm a mum of three and just getting my kids through the teenage years, and I feel like I'm almost there, and that's actually how I ended up in supervision. But I have been a GP supervisor as, you know, I landed this as a new fellow in 2003 very accidentally because nobody else would, and it's been a privilege to watch registrars grow in the town that I am. So I'm a GP in Mackay, and I first met Karen when Karen was a registrar and I was a new fellow as a supervisor and had no idea what I was doing. And it's been a joy to watch her career. I wear various different hats over time, and my career has ebbed and flowed depending on the demands of life. Recently, I'm former president of RACGP, been a supervisor since 2023. Been involved in governance, increasingly so. So like Karen, I'm involved with other medical colleges as well. I've been a supervisor for various RTOs, RBTS, ACRM, RACGP. And I think the beauty about general practice is we have lots of different careers within careers, and I'm also a practice owner as well. So
I like the description of ebbs and flows. You expect an ebb after the flow as well. So
it has been lovely turning everything off for the last 6 months. I can't tell.
Fantastic. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Sarah Chalmers. So first and foremost, I'm a rural generalist. I work in the Northern Territory. I recently moved over from North Queensland, but NT's been my home for a long time. So my current job, I'm the Deputy Director of Medical Services for Public and Primary Healthcare for NT Health, managing primary healthcare across a number of remote communities in the top end of the NT. So I said I was a rural generalist. My AST is in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health, and I've spent most of my career living, working and supervising in really remote communities, predominantly across Arnhem Land and now across the Darwin region. I do a couple of other things. So I'm an ex-president of ACRM. I'm ex now, I think. I'm the president-elect for the Rural Doctors Association of Australia. Take that up in October. I am the clinical lead for selections for ACRM. So getting to select the next generation of rural generalists, which is an awesome job. I've recently been an SLO for ACRM, but I'm community-less at the moment, so didn't get to keep that going. And I'm also, like so many of my fellow panelists, I'm a mum, and I'm managing a teenager down in Tasmania, which is actually a really nice way to parent. And I have an older daughter at university at home with me. So that's a really important part of who I am as well. Thank you, Srishti.
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, can I call it remote parenting? I mean, analogy to remote supervision, which we will not necessarily get to, but just thought that I haven't achieved that yet. The children are still here in the same abode as me. So thank you. Leonie.
Hi, my name's Leonie Chamberlain. I do have my GPSA background on, but I am here as my role as a practice manager. I've been a practice manager in Melbourne for 23 years now, and I actually come from an accounting background. My other hats are that I do work for GPSA as the Chief Operations Officer a couple of days a week, and I am on the board of GPSA as well. And like others, I'm a mum, so I told somebody yesterday that my daughter came to work with me when she was 17 days old. So she's the longest serving member of our practice as far as her lifespan goes. And it was a wonderful place to be able to work and take your baby in. And I didn't see her other than feeding and changing. She was just gone. As soon as she was ready to be settled, there'd be a nurse or a receptionist, sometimes even patients who were friends saying, I'll go around the corner, I'll take her for a walk. So that's me. And I'm really pleased to be here representing practice managers and what we do in the supervision team.
Thanks, Leonie, and so much there to talk about in that regard, hopefully, as we go along. Can I invite Kelly, please?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly. I'm feeling quite starstruck by the celebrities that you mentioned on the panel here so far, Srishti. I'm in the phase that Nicole mentioned, not knowing what she was doing at the beginning. I'm representing early career supervisors. I'm working in rural Victoria, where I'm also a practice owner, and my other paid hat is for university a couple of days a week, looking after third year medical students. And yeah, my unpaid hat also includes 3 children, and I'm adjusting to being the parent of an adult as of the last month. And yeah, a bit similar to Leonie's, that, you know, I've been a bit enmeshed in the practice over the years, and after many years of begging, the eldest has been permitted by us to work as a receptionist in our clinic over the last few months as well. So it's all in the family around here.
Awesome. I reckon my kids are keen for me to buy one just so they can come and work and not have to do anything else outside of the practice. I'm not a practice owner. In case anyone had doubts, it's a big undertaking, and I have admiration for those of you who are doing it alongside all the other hats too. So great to have you here, Kelly. Asma.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Asma. I am a GP based on the Gold Coast. I'm currently in the season of life of maternity leave and kids. So I have a 3-year-old and 3-month-old. So I'm very much the beginning of that journey. And so in terms of my career-wise, I am doing a bit of part-time gypsy, GP with special interest work, as well as a medical educator. And I'm not a supervisor yet. I really would like to be a supervisor, and I have a bit of a journey from that perspective. And I'm hoping as soon as I get back into general practice, I'm going to tick that career goal box of becoming a GP supervisor.
Awesome. So we know exactly who we need to impress and what the standards for that will be. Thanks to you, Asma. So Asma is quite heavily involved in medical education, so it's good to have an ME perspective as well. And I'm aware, Nicole and Sarah, you've been involved with that space as well in the past, as well as Karen. It's fantastic to have all of you, the diversity of everyone's experiences, as well as the various different organizations we represent. I'd just like to also note that both Sarah and Nicole have been on the board of GPSA in the past and contributed to the inception of the Women GP Supervision project, of which this webinar is a part, but there are many other parts to it that you can explore on GPSA's website. So to start off, I'd like to start with Asma. In your journey or in your travels of trying to figure out how to become a supervisor, whether you want to do it or not, are there any particular myths or misconceptions or stories that you've encountered that you'd like to share with the panel?
Sure. So I think my journey actually started very soon after fellowship. So I fellowed in about 2018, and that first year, obviously finding your feet, and I realized I was doing a lot of ad hoc supervision of both registrars and medical students, and I enjoyed it. I got good feedback. People were telling me I'm a good teacher and I'm helpful, and it's all working out really well. And I thought, what? I think I should sort of maybe, put this in a formal capacity and, let's be honest, get a bit remunerated as well for all the hard work I was putting in. So I went to one of the senior GPs in my practice, who was also the practice owner, who was male, whether that makes a difference or not. But anyway, and I sort of said, look, I really like to be a supervisor. How do I go about it? And he sort of was like, oh, he sort of didn't seem that excited. And he sort of just said to me, look, it's something that you need to sort of, if you're working in a full-time capacity, that's probably the more suitable to those who are working full-time. And I was like, okay, I was working full-time. So I thought, okay, that's sort of fine. He did say though, oh, you know what, you probably should wait 5 years. And I was like, oh, is that a rule? And he's just like, oh, I think it's just sort of generally what is expected. You should just sort of wait that period of time. And so that sort of advice, coupled with then the imposter syndrome that sort of bubbled and grew, I kind of was like, oh, kind of took a back seat from supervision. And I kind of was like, maybe the safer option for me is medical students. And so I went down that route. But now I've sort of come around and now I've got kids and other things. And so I will be going back into general practice on a part-time basis. So I'd really like to start that journey up again. But obviously I just want to know the stepping stones to sort of getting there.
Awesome. And Kelly, if I remember correctly, you'd mentioned that you'd had a bit of initial steps into this and slightly not straightforward entry into supervision. Do you want to share any of what your beginnings of supervising were like?
Yeah, I think it was very much incremental in my case. And obviously, a lot of people would be familiar with the landscape that's changed with who's provided and what have been the requirements to do it over certain years and so on. And our practice probably had an informal approach that is currently now the kind of formal approach in terms of really team supervision, where everyone really was sharing the load, even if there were only a certain amount of accredited supervisors. And now it seems like the ability to have more supervisors accredited has been available to a lot of practices. So as that's opened up, I've just sort of taken that opportunity to become a formal supervisor initially as one of the people that would help out when the primary person wasn't available, and then eventually have had registrars of my own who I've been the primary supervisor for. So I guess that was a good way to dip the toe in the water, and I'm feeling like the sliding doors moment, because I think a lot of that was totally because of the also older male supervisor that I had, but instead of them giving me the advice that ASMA's ones did, they were like, oh no, you can do it, everyone can do it, it's fine, just do it, don't worry about the paperwork sort of thing. So that was how I got into it over the last few years.
Also, it's fascinating because you both had different advice, but started in a very informal capacity, getting involved with that supervision within the practice. Just wondering if Karen or Nicole or Sarah would like to comment on, is that what we should expect? Is that the usual way to get involved? What was your initial introduction to supervision like as well? What should we expect as well?
I'm actually going to ask a question before I answer it. And one of the things that struck me, if this was a panel with all male supervisors, would they be talking about their children and their families? And would we be talking about the other around supervision? And I think it'd be a very, very different conversation around how people introduce themselves and how they define themselves. And I think that's also really important about how we define ourselves as supervisors. So I'm an accidental supervisor. It wasn't anything that I sought initially. And it wasn't organised then. And then what happened when I came back from maternity leave is that I wanted to get back into medical education, and all the people who, and especially the blokes, had been climbing up the ladder, and there were no doors there for me to actually go into. And so basically what I was doing was mentoring, which was providing the pastoral care. And with that also became the education, and that's where I became a supervisor. And I was really lucky that I had somebody actually tap me on the shoulder and actually say, look, I think you'd be, do you want to put your hand up for an SLO and imposter syndrome? No, I can't do that. And then that became a job at the time, it was the first female medical educator for supervision, because that didn't exist in those times. And supervisors belonged to practice owners, and I wasn't a practice owner. And it gave me meaning and passion to medicine when I was coming back, and it also provided flexibility. And especially when you're raising a family, I think you need to be able to have graceful entry and exits, and that's what supervision also provided. And I don't know if other people's experiences were like that, but that's what mine was.
If I can just add to that, so my experience is probably kind of similar in that it happened accidentally, or certainly not purposefully. So as I already explained, I've got a background in remote So I did a couple of years as an ED registrar. And when you're a registrar in a big hospital, you just get interns and junior doctors and medical students. And so even though I didn't want to be supervising people because I was barely managing my own workload, I did it. So that's how I started. When I went out to start working in Gove or Nhulunbuy, so partly based at the hospital and partly based in general practice. So I had a supervisor in general practice, except he was so busy because we were the only 2 GPs in town. The supervision was fairly limited. I felt like I didn't have very good role models. As part of my other job working in the hospital, we would usually be on our own. So when I was the DMO, either after hours or on weekends, I didn't have a supervisor. So just worked out how to, you build up a group of colleagues, to help you out with things that you're not too sure about. So I made some of my colleagues be my supervisors, and I probably provided some supervision and some care for them. Again, a lot of what we did was going out on our own to, really remote communities. So I was based in Nhulunbuy, but we would fly out so I went to Milingimbi, which was, another couple of hours flight from Nhulunbuy, seriously out in the middle of nowhere on an island, the only doctor. So actually the really quality supervision that I had at that stage was from the RANs. That's where I learned what quality supervision was like. And once I became fellowed and people said, we've got PG triple Ps or we've got, junior registrars who we want to come and work out where you are. So you're not the primary supervisor, but need to be providing supervision. And I always had in the back of my head that I wanted to provide, I think, a better quality education and be more caring to the people that were working with me. Firstly, because it's a much nicer way to manage things, to not cause people the harm that I encountered as a really junior doctor, but also, we're stuck in remote. We have huge problems with workforce and things like that. And I think that, role modelling, what a great career it was, how much I enjoyed my job was a really important part of supervision for me. And I'm probably much more interested in role modelling and encouraging people to have good experiences as opposed to, helping out with exam preparation and things like that. I think to answer part of Nicole's question, I think that maybe the slightly different slant that you get from talking to women supervisors is that we actually have a slightly different approach, I think. So there's a very traditional, I'm the teacher, I'm the supervisor, I'm the senior doctor, I know most of the stuff, I can help you, these are all the things you need to know, as opposed to, come and be a part of our workplace, come and, learn what you need to learn, help us learn what we need. I feel like with my women colleagues, it always feels much, much more collaborative, and I like group supervision as opposed to sort of more one-on-one.
Awesome. I mean, I think you almost got me to mentoring with what you've said so far, Sarah. So I'm going to ask Karen what her experience has been like and what has it been like to pay it forward? How much of it, we've gone from a traditional teaching to you've led us into that space with Nicole mentioned pastoral care, you've mentioned the role modeling. Karen, I think you can bring it home for us with any additional thoughts on that as well.
I just want to say how awesome would it be to be mentored by Sarah, firstly. But for me, it was actually it was something that I'd thought about for a few years. I'd sort of recognised I'd been doing supervision through the hospital. I spent quite a lot of time in the hospital. And it was the practice owner who said, I would like you to be one of the supervisors. We need more supervisors in this practice. And I went, okay. So there was a little bit of that imposter syndrome, but then I sort of leapt with the thought that, well, if she didn't think I could do it, she wouldn't have said it. So, just put some faith in the other person who's sort of tapped you on the shoulder, if you like, just to try and shrug off that imposter syndrome. Just reflecting on what Sarah was saying, and I I think the supervisors that have been really good examples of what supervision can be are the ones who don't view it as a transactional experience. It's about the relationship and the relationality. I think that's probably what it is. And perhaps that is what females bring to this space more so than men. And if I go back and think about the male supervisors that I've had, a couple of them would have asked about how things are going at home, how I'm fitting in, study, they would have asked about those sorts of things. Whereas I can think of the female supervisors who definitely all covered that. So I think it's just that unique, that different perspective that is brought to the supervision that women can bring. But I do think it's about relationality, and that's what makes the supervision, this particular role, so valuable and rewarding. And as Nicole has sort of said, you watch people you have supervised and see how their careers unfold, and to know that you've contributed a little bit to it is just such a privilege. So I hope I brought it home in the way that you were hoping. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm hoping.
I think you have, and I probably should acknowledge that even though the panel is about women in supervision, I'm sure we can think of male supervisors who have had that quality of relational, caring, coaching approach. Well, certainly I had a male supervisor who fulfilled all those criteria. So it sounds like it's more about the qualities and attributes that creates that relationship. And for me, it was almost always about, I recall one of my earliest supervision training days, which wasn't here, was in the UK, I should say, where I walked away thinking, well, this is very similar to a GP patient relationship. If I have less hierarchy and more collaboration and more individualized input, I'm going to get the most out of this as a trainee as well as a supervisor. Nicole?
I was actually thinking, Shristi, that it actually comes down to often, this leadership journey and bringing our younger doctors up through the system into leadership and supervision. And we have a choice. We can either bring those around us and bring them up with us. And I think that's the model that we're all aspiring to. The other is that if we don't do that, it's a more of an authoritarian space. We either tend to push others down and have a very different type of relationship. And I think the style that women bring is often very different, but it's also then who is opening the doors. And I'm sorry, this is still being quite gendered, but it's often been traditionally that those men have been the ones who've opened the doors and those male supervisors. But having the allies in the space has actually enabled the women then to start stepping up. And I was talking when I first came onto the GPSA board 10 years ago, I was the only woman in the space. And that's changed a lot. And having enablers, having allies is really, really important.
Absolutely. Allies and sponsors and some other technical words that go with it sometimes, with little different, minor differences between them. I was going to ask Leonie, where do you see yourself? I mean, practice managers historically also has largely been women, and quite a few women earlier than GPs, I suspect. What role do practice managers have? And is it as gendered as it seems in general GP supervision?
It's definitely gendered in metro areas. When I've got a meeting to go to on Thursday for our PHN, and I will be surprised if there's more than one man in the room as a practice manager. But when we get out into the rural areas, I think that there are more men in the role. For me, I'd have to echo what's been said by the other panelists. I've been at the practice for 23 years, and 4 of my bosses now, so practice principals, came through the practice as registrars whilst I was there. So I've seen them come in as GPT-1s, nervous, anxious, sitting there signing all those damn Medicare forms and, watching them as they call their first patient, and they're now my bosses. And it's wonderful to see. It's really lovely to see that career progression. And I'm very happy to say that, one of those 4 is a female, but it has been, I think, tougher if you're the primary carer, regardless of your gender. I think if you're the primary carer for your family, it is a tougher gig to have because there are those additional responsibilities at home. And, if you've got a GP T1, you require 100% on-site supervision for at least the first 4 weeks. Well, that's pretty hard when you get that call to say that someone's fallen off the monkey bars and you've got to run. So for me, I think that the practice manager is the enabler for both the registrar and the supervisor. We're the ones behind the scenes who are making sure appointment books are right, tutorials are there. You don't notice us when it all goes smoothly, but when something goes wrong, that's, I think, when the practice manager is noticed the most. But I actually think that a lot of our role is that pastoral care and also being an independent person, so that if, I always say to our registrars, if you've got an issue, I'm Switzerland. And it is very hard, I think, for registrars sometimes because historically supervisors have been practice owners, so therefore supervisors are the boss. And we're all here wearing multiple hats. That's a really hard line, or it can be a difficult line if you've got your supervisor who is also your employer, but you have an issue or some conflict. I think it's really good that there's somebody else within the practice who can be that independent person who's there to hear both sides of the stories and be a mediator and work towards resolutions. And I really think that that's where we sit, and that's where we bring a lot of value, is being that person who can be supportive. And whether or not we do that, our success in doing that is because we are mainly a female-based occupation, I'm not sure. I'd like to think that everybody can bring those sorts of skills and that sort of compassion and understanding. But I think practice managers are females because we're fixers and we juggle many things at the same time. Everyone says that you can't multitask, but I've had to do lots of things in the same, Anyway, I'm getting off track here.
No, there was a quote I heard just before I came on, and I'm not even sure I was going to say this here, but it came up that apparently Margaret Thatcher once said that if you want someone to talk about the job that needs to be done, give it to a man, and if you want the job done, give it to a woman. So there you go. So maybe we just get the job done irrespective. So I did wonder about the nature of it being gendered in terms of practice management. Keeping in mind, asthma is the one we need to impress. There was something she mentioned early on, which I don't think we've got to, which is being part-time GPs. And mindful that everyone here, probably, even though we don't describe ourselves as part-time, are working more than full-time, but have clinical presence can be not be as much as what would be considered full-time. Is that something any of you have had to juggle? And if so, what does that look like when you're supervising and, well, in Nicole's case and Sarah's case, being, in formal leadership roles as well? And how does that work out in providing good quality supervision and not compromising it?
A college gig, I had to step back off supervision other than the fact I was conflicted. So that's the first thing. And when I was GPSA chair, still managed it. And it is lovely actually being back on the tools. And I think, as Sarah was saying before, we actually supervise as a team these days, and it's changed. And the thing is, I think the system hasn't actually kept up with the change for supervision teams. Just trying to get one of my, JPs accredited as a supervisor has been really challenging. Even for myself, so my practice is now 8 years old. And when I moved over from my existing practice to a new practice to be accredited, and the RTO at the time, it took me just under a year to actually be able to do that. And so I think the systems, the times, the frameworks actually are the bit that's really, really frustrating. Sorry, I've gone off piste a bit, but I think the challenges are that I think this is where the mentorship and the supervision and making sure it's not just the GPs who are the supervisors, it's your practice managers, it's your nurses, it's a team-based game these days. Yes, you need a primary supervisor because somebody has to tick off on the paperwork, which is, I'm going to say, an increasing challenge that I personally also struggle with. But on a day-to-day basis, it's the whole of practice who is there for your registrar to be there as a supervisor and to support the supervisor.
I'll just say one small thing about the part-time situation. I've been clinically part-time for nearly my whole general practice career, apart from, the brief stint in Ireland. But Look, a lot of registrars are part-time now too, so it's very much just working out about room availability, and it may be a delight to your practice and it's something that you can talk about with registrars at interview. We've got XYZ willing and available to supervise on XYZ days. How does that look for you, and that sort of thing. So yes, if you have a full-time registrar, you'd obviously be probably needing to share a supervision role, but you may have a registrar all to yourself even as a part-time supervisor.
Sarah, what does that look like in terms of the more remote aspects? And I know that both of you have been involved with RVTS as well. That's a model that kind of lends itself to that to some extent. Any existing solutions or workarounds that people use that members might consider taking to their practices?
I mean, RVTS is the funded program that showcases remote supervision, but actually remote supervision has existed, certainly wherever I've worked, for a long time. And it's actually a special set of skills. Karen very eloquently translated what I was trying to say earlier, which is about the relationship side of things. And so remote supervision really relies on a quality relationship. I think I mentioned previously, which builds on what Nicole said about it's team-based supervision. So you rely on anybody who is around to support the registrar. And, I think one of the things about particularly really remote work, where you often get sent on your own because there's only one person to go, there's only one seat on the plane, there's only enough patients to justify one doctor. So you might go somewhere just as the only doctor, but you're usually with a very experienced RN. And, in those remote clinics, RANs, they're not, and, apologies to all the practice nurses out there, because you're not just practice nurses either, but, a RAN will do everything from, assist you with putting together your care plan, to plastering a fractured femur, to running the arrest after hours, and calling the DMO and having a patient retrieved. So these are exceptional clinicians, and they actually provide excellent supervision for, training rural generalists and rural GPs. Well, remote, I guess I should stop saying rural, because I hate it when other people just talk about rural. I'm talking about remote. So, for example, across the Northern Territory, we've always had a remote service for primary care, for retrievals, for all of those sorts of things. And so just adding supervision into that, was a very natural thing to do. And so we're much better at, as I said, RVTS has got a whole program based around remote supervision, but it happens a lot for both RACGP and ACRM registrars in lots of different contexts. And I think, the more we take time to recognise the roles that are played by all of our clinical colleagues, particularly in remote care, then they're not just our clinical colleagues, they're our, stand-in supervisors as well. And so most registrars I know will have a primary supervisor, and then we'll have a series of day-to-day supervisors depending which clinic they're in, who's on holidays. It might be a locum, it might be an Aboriginal health practitioner. It's anybody who's there, because there's a whole bunch of people with a lot of knowledge, not just about how to manage diabetes, but how to actually function in a really remote clinic, because being a good doctor in that context is more than just, do you know the medicine? Perhaps some of the ways that you learn to form relationships with your patients, taking guidance from, your Aboriginal health practitioner colleagues and things, is a really important part of it. So I think our funders, because, when you're talking about accredited supervisors, when we talk about primary supervisors, when we talk about, how do we get remunerated for the work that we're doing, our funders have a long way to go in actually understanding the way that most of our registrars, certainly in remote Australia, are supervised. But listening to both Nicole and Karen and Kelly, it really is it's a team-based approach. And so having one supervisor payment for one person for each particular supervisor really isn't working very well. It'd be great to have that fixed so that we could actually properly recognise the work that everyone's doing.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I guess, Leonie's referred to it already, but there are non-clinicians who are part of that supervision or training practice or training site. I call it a learning site. Leonie, how much of a contribution do you think the non-clinicians, or in fact the non-doctors, I should say, make in terms of the team-based approach that we're talking about here?
It's enormous. The nursing team especially, we will always try to locate our registrar near the nursing team so that they can simply open the door, and if they're supervisors with a patient, there is somebody there that they can refer to straight away. When it comes to billing, it's the admin team, who is helping them. When it comes to insurance reports, it's the secretarial support. There's so much variety, and the supervisor is, they're still seeing patients. They're still trying to make a living as well. And as Sarah's just said, there's not a lot of money in there's no payment for supervision. There's only payment for the actual teaching time. So the supervisor relies on the rest of the team to fill in those gaps. They don't want to be teaching a GPT-1 the difference between, an item 23 and an item 36, or how to use the clinical software. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes, and it would be, I think, if a supervisor was expected to do all of that on their own, you wouldn't get anybody putting their hand up for it unless it was someone who was, a practice owner solely looking for succession planning and prepared to take a financial hit in that way. But the nursing team, I think, are invaluable, especially when it comes to those, immunisation schedules and things like that, which seem to change quite frequently, I see. And yeah, as I say, the admin team, because let's face it, item numbers are coming and going all the time as well. So, our supervisors really do rely on the rest of the team to make sure that everything is covered.
Thanks, Leonie. And I certainly am starting to get the feeling that Asma is going to be having some more conversations with other people than herself in terms of what she has to achieve before she becomes a supervisor. So, Asma, you're getting some ideas on who the people are that you need to speak to, not just the requirements for becoming a supervisor, but what are the other conversations that are going to happen? Any thoughts on that so far?
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's sort of exciting to hear that it is a team-based approach, and that's how supervision is occurring, because I guess it was a bit daunting to hear it's sort of a one-on-one, and definitely that imposter syndrome sort of coming in that I was like, do I have enough experience? Do I have enough skills to do that, to know that it can be shared amongst other colleagues, other clinicians, other people in the practice? Puts me a little bit at ease, takes the pressure off a little bit, and I can sort of potentially just, weave my way in what my strengths are and start from that aspect as my first foot in, as opposed to just feeling like, oh, I have to take it all on board, because I kind of was a bit worried about, how do I do that practically, and how do I get to those steps? But maybe, for me, I'm thinking maybe I can just be part of that team to start off with and see how I go from that aspect.
Awesome. I mean, can I bring in a question that I feel like I've asked but not quite had the answer for? Is we refer to supervision. Sarah mentioned all these clinical skills, all these, I guess we can categorize them into many things, but they're all skills you learn as you become a good GP. How much of that is different? So there are different levels of training. So you've got medical students, you've got pre-vocational doctors and registrars. Have any of you felt there was a big gap between moving from one level of learner to the next? And yes or no, either ways, how did you feel you bridged that gap or got the confidence to go from one level to the next?
I think the principles of supervision apply regardless. So there are principles of supervision and they apply. What a supervisor needs to know is where the learner's at that point in time and where do they need to be, so that you're not expecting a first-year medical student to have the knowledge and the skills of a fifth-year medical student. I think that can be quite demoralising from a student perspective, because your expectations are unrealistic. So I think it's more about knowing where the learner is at, where they need to be, and if they are where they need to be, are they able to extend themselves just that little bit more? So, then you're starting to instill some confidence in them as well. And knowing what the different requirements are for that particular placement. So I think the principles of supervision are the same, because it's about patient safety. It's about clinical application of their learnings. It's not about necessarily teaching them content, but how things are done. and how we do them and how we go about doing them and how we go about learning as well. Because I think one attribute of a supervisor, and I think this is true of a medical educator as well, is that the medical educators and supervisors I know love learning. They just love acquiring knowledge. So I think it's about that ongoing lifelong learning and people that enjoy it. But no, I think that there are attributes, there are principles, and they're the same across that training continuum. You just need to make sure you're pitching at the correct level for that particular learner.
Thanks, Karen. In that sense, were there any particular resources or any particular, help you sought or saw anyone else seek in making that transition? Because in people's minds, it feels like every time I get asked the question, it's, oh, I've only supervised medical students is often what I hear. So in my mind, they are, as you've said, it's an extension of you acquiring some information to be able to deliver the same for a different learning context.
And I didn't know about this when I started supervision, but you can actually do some courses. So a couple of universities do courses on supervision. By the time I started doing supervision, I'd done the Teaching on the Run program in the hospital, which was good. But there are a couple of certificates you can do in clinical supervision and teaching, which is different to the medical education. That's definitely one thing that you can do. About 12 months after I started becoming a supervisor, I found GPSA, and I can't remember how I found GPSA, but there are a lot of resources on there that I actually leaned on quite heavily to help with developing some of the skills of supervision, as well as the RTO at the time also had an introductory education day for new supervisors that you'd have to attend annually. You'd have to go and attend some supervisor training as well. There's definitely a lot more out there now than what there was earlier. And I think that because there's a lot more discussion amongst a lot of peers now about supervision, I think it's a lot easier to find the information than what it used to be.
Thanks, Kat. I mean, Nicole and Sarah, do you guys have any input regarding the colleges as to what the transition looks like for new supervisors from, I guess, ticking the boxes in terms of becoming a supervisor looks like for RSC, GP, and ACRM? My understanding is there are online modules. Do either of you have any additional insights of what that's like?
I guess the first thing is supervision is different to medical education. And I think we need to make that really clear. And a lot of our medical educators are not supervisors or have never been, and vice versa. It's a different skill set, and what we deliver as supervisors day to day in where, the environment that we practice in is very, very different to education. And I think transitioning through from medical students to, GPs in training is that you're dealing with adult learners who've got very different expectations and outcomes. The stakes starting to increase, but also the risk starts to increase as well for supervisors, and that vicarious liability and risk, and really also changes the importance of what we deliver on the ground. I think the development supervision is now, I'm going to say, a career aspiration as well, which is wonderful that this is something that people look to as part of their development as a GP and as they take their career journey through general practice. And there are a lot more tools that are out there to develop supervision, and it's becoming formalised. Now, look, that comes with its goods and its bads as well, because it can increase the barriers for people being supervisors, but it also, we want to increase the prestige of being a supervisor and the impact that has on your own practice, because we know that most supervisors do this for altruistic reasons. They certainly don't do it for the money, but they do it for the love. And it's part of the thing that actually brings them joy and meaning into their practice. But I am seeing a change in the way, especially and I will say, as more women come on board, as we have more demands on our time, we're actually also putting in some better boundaries around how we deliver supervision and what we do. But also with that, we also raise the expectation. And I think that's where, with GPSA and the resources and that have been developed deliver to supervisors also through the medical colleges with both ACRM and RACGP, what they deliver now with the return of training back to the colleges is really the recognition that supervision is a really important part of our profession, and it's valued, and it should be valued even more so.
From an ACRM perspective, one of the things that has made supervision quite tricky in the ACRM space is because of the transition and the focus on AGPT being about general practice. And general practice and primary care is actually only part of what we do as rural generalists. And so if you want to be a rural generalist supervisor, it might be in primary care. I think I've already explained that, remote primary care often looks very different to traditional office-based general practice. But we're also supervisors for our registrars in our remote and rural hospitals. So whether it's in the emergency department, whether it is looking after inpatients, that's a really tricky part of supervision that is not particularly well recognised within, the AGPT space. So most of us, our experience of working in hospitals and looking after inpatients, we do when we were junior doctors, which is following orders from our consultants, whereas we need to be supervising and teaching our registrars how to look after inpatients, which again is not something that's traditionally recognised as part of GP training. And so again, it's just a really wide set of skills that you need not just to do your own work, but to be supervising as well. And I think, never want to sound like I'm being a victim, but, rural generalists are really poorly understood in the AGPT space. So the road to supervision, again, we've got all these new rules, and this has been part of the transition. So we've transitioned all of the processes, from RTOs into the college spaces. And now we're in that certainly ACRM is in that consolidation mode. So what do we actually want from our supervisors? And there's lots of resources out there, but it's predominantly based on office-based general practice supervision and doesn't cover some of the nuances of rural generalist practice. So you need to be accredited to have a registrar in your space. And as Nicole said, there's some altruism in there. There's, because you don't do it for the money, but we're also doing it for workforce. And so we're juggling, always juggling that aspect as well. But I think people who really enjoy that kind of work, supervision is a fabulous addition to just your everyday work.
Absolutely. It sounds like, every time I engage in this space, there's always room for more improvement. What we achieve builds the foundation for the next step of what's to come. I'm actually going to go to Kelly and ask your practice and your involvement with the supervision space. Do you feel that in a practice there is clinical leadership skills involved with supervision or those who engage in being a supervisor? Is that something that Sarah almost alluded to that in the context of, we more visibly see that as in hospital settings, but is that a skill that supervisors have, or is that what actually a designated supervisor does? Do they lead the team in terms of being the main person that orchestrates the rest?
I think it probably varies practice to practice. And in my practice's context, there's a mixture of practice owners and independent GPs who do supervise. And I guess everyone's got their own style of both clinical supervision and clinical leadership, as you said, which there's a lot of overlap there. I would probably just reflect a little bit back to your previous question about people who are only feeling confident enough to supervise medical students. And I would say, in my experience, it's not any more difficult to supervise registrars. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it's easier compared with having students, which I've had students both in the primary care context and also, just in their own education-based environment. So don't underestimate that. If you have managed to do medical student teaching or supervision, then you can definitely do it. But if you haven't, I don't think you should think that you should do that first, or that would be, an ideal training ground or anything like that. I think stepping straight into, obviously, you're a fellow GP already. This is your passion, this is your skill set. And I would say, yeah, it's a good opportunity to exercise that clinical leadership that you mentioned, Srishti, and that could be within a broader context within the practice, but not necessarily. You know, we all know how powerful it is to lead and influence and mentor one person. And if that's what your first experience of it is, that's more than adequate, I would say.
Stay with you, Kelly. And the question is more around, we've all established reasons for doing this is very varied. I mean, everyone's spoken to broad reasons as well as probably individual reasons. What still kept you involved in supervision? Like, you've done it for a while, had many different versions of it. Why are you still doing it?
I'm a bit of a sucker for people, you know. It's a human interest story for me every semester if as it rolls around, and I love, just hearing people's journey, how they came to be a registrar and what they might be wanting to do, and ideally hoping that they'll join us long term, but most of them don't. But it's just great, as someone else said earlier, just being that little chink in someone's journey. So I just enjoy, mostly the human story, that you can have clinical conversations with someone, but it's a bit broader than that as well.
Awesome. I'm going to leave it open to the others to share anything that still keeps them motivated in spite of all the challenges that we've discussed, as well as many different journeys. So leaving it open to the floor. Why are you still supervising?
I'm going to jump in right here, is that one of the reasons is that I want a really good GP as I age. Let's face it, our registrars are our future GPs. If we're not taking registrars and supervising and providing great clinical teaching, we're the ones that are going to end up getting really poor care in the future. So I think that if you want a good GP for yourself, if you want a good GP for your family in the future, it's something that we've got a tiny little bit of control over, which I think it's nice to be able to have that. And working in a general practice, you do know the difference between good quality and not so good quality. And I know what sort of GP I want for myself and my family as I get older. And I know what sort of GP my mum had, which was wonderful. So, I think that that's certainly part of it, a little bit selfish. I want to make sure that I'm looked after really, really well.
In balance, I'm not sure it's that selfish for all the work you've already put in, Leonie, but I take your point. Karen?
For me, it's about the next generation. It's definitely about that. And I think I'm quite optimistic. I believe that we can have a thriving future, but supervisors have to be a critical part of that. For me, it's about the future. It's such a fantastic and such a privilege, this job like that we have, which for most of us is more than a job. It's a calling. Why wouldn't you want to invest in the future? And supervision is so critical, and I get a lot out of it. I really do. I think I probably do get more out of it than they do, just that sense of reward. But it is really nice to watch people grow as humans and as clinicians. It's really lovely to watch.
Thank you, Karen. And after that very, very inspiring part, my little selfish note is I did want to attend a graduation ceremony of someone I had met and supervised, but I haven't met that goal yet. So I'm still going, because one day I will be there at the graduation ceremony for someone who I've supervised. Sarah and Nicole, any thoughts on that one? You are still here. You intend to both stay in this space. What keeps you in the supervision space, I suppose, more so than the other hats that you both have?
So you're right, Tristy, it is really cool to see people that you have supervised get their fellowship. If I can encourage you, because the next step up, which is way cooler, is actually getting to hand them their fellowship. So becoming college president, there's an extra layer to that. And from a personal perspective, I think very similarly to other panel members, but also that, I've got an extra. Rural and remote, particularly remote medicine, doesn't get a good rap. People don't understand what we do. It's scary, it's hot and difficult, and not something that people have a lot of experience with. And so being a supervisor in that space, as somebody who has very publicly, said a number of times how much I love my job, how much I love the career that I chose. And I didn't end up there by accident. It was deliberate. And I've very deliberately stayed, despite all of the difficulties of trying to, have children and partners and living in a place where they can, continue to, do what they need to do. But remote work is really important, and it's really important that we maintain quality, although I feel like I've just patted myself on the back there, good quality supervisors who actually care about what they're doing and really care about making sure that we've got a really robust workforce in the future. Continuing to supervise is a really important part of that.
Nicole.
It's the vibe of the thing, isn't it? It's about relationship and looking around the room. And so, I got a text message while we were doing this from one of my registrars who was a remote registrar that I supervised. And she was just actually touching base and just letting me know what was happening with the kids. And that's what we do, I think, and especially as female supervisors, we grow people. It is not transactional, it's relational. And we don't necessarily, yes, we are there for a part of their career, but we often are there for other different bits. So I hear about the birthdays, I'm changing roles, my marriage has ended, I'm having a career crisis. So we actually step not just from supervision, but to something bigger and wider. And I think that's the intrinsic value. We grow these networks, we make people stick. When I was talking earlier about growing our own, we make them sticky in general practice because we inspire them because we love what we do. And I think it makes it so much easier when supervision brings meaning and joy to your work to pass that along and then to the next generation and so on. And when we grow our own as general practitioners in whatever field and wherever we work, and I think that's the other part is GPs, we can have careers within careers and we can wear lots and lots of different hats, and we can demonstrate that, look, sometimes I do it well, sometimes I don't, but you can do multiple things within general practice. And I think that's the value that we bring as female supervisors, and we bring texture and meaning to the work. And it's not just, there is, yes, the clinical supervision and the skills that we have, but we also bring a multi-dimensional viewpoint to supervision, and that's our value.
Awesome. I remember having a phone call with Nicole ages ago, and I'm not sure Nicole will remember this, but wondering about, if I was ready to be a supervisor or not. It was interesting in that I think someone's mentioned here about remuneration and not doing it for the remuneration. It's funny that most of us do it for reasons other than the remuneration, more so than whatever we get paid for it, is how I've seen it. And one of the things that, for me, when I had the conversation with Nicole was, well, how much of a commitment is this? What if in a year's time I am not able to continue doing this? It's a real thing, not just as women supervisors, but as GPs, as humans who are getting older and have to put in self-care. Have you ever taken a break from supervision? Have you had to step away and step back in? And where do you get the support then to do that?
Can I actually say the thing that nearly broke me in my career was being a supervisor with a registrar in difficulty. And that's what burnt me out the first time. And yes, I had colleagues. That's actually what really brought me into the bosom of GPSA. However, I think because we invest so much, that also is one of those risks. So boundaries are really, really important to do. And I think sometimes that's also the challenge for us as well. And I think that's something I see the new generation coming through is much better at putting those boundaries in. But I'd also hate to see, I wonder if the conversation would be very different if we move it to transactional, then it also becomes about money. And I think we need to find that balance between that. But I would love to see supervision better remunerated. I want to see it as, well, actually it's the missing link. With every government meeting I have been in around workforce, it has been about supervision as the missing link. And it's not just in general practice, it's within every other medical specialty. So valuing our worth, making sure that we self-care, but at the same time, just finding that balance between the two.
I'm going to ask Karen, because I do remember being in another workshop with you and wondering, what does support look like for someone as a supervisor? Not saying that we will run into difficulty, but as Nicole said, that's you do invest quite heavily in that relationship, in that work. What if you find yourself looking for help or floundering or unsure if you want to continue doing it or have a break?
Yeah, and hopefully you have developed a network of people that you trust and who you can talk through with those issues. I do have a network, and I call them my loving truth tellers, because they will tell me the truth no matter how hard it is, but they will deliver it with a lot of love. So I really have to respect what they say. So if they say, no, you're doing a bit much, and or your perspective on this is all wrong, then I have to really take notice of what they say. So hopefully you should have a network established of people that you trust dearly. I will say, I think I agree with Nicole that the hardest times I have had have been when I've had a registrar who has been in distress. And that has been the hardest thing to manage, because there's a different type of uncertainty with that. You know, in general practice, we're taught to deal with uncertainty, how to manage that. But when it comes from someone you're supervising, there's a whole other level of emotions that you have to deal with. So at times, you know, if you're needing psychological support, you book in with a psychologist. You know, you do all those things that we actually don't discuss a lot publicly about how we keep ourselves well in those really challenging times. Make an appointment with your GP. If you have to step back from it, there is absolutely no shame in that. There is absolutely no shame in saying, actually, right now at this point in time, I have to take the pressure off myself. You know, it is definitely about being kind to yourself. But I'll let Leonie.
Give yourself permission to do it more than anything else. You're saying, Karen? Yes, Leonie.
I think that it's really important to acknowledge that sometimes the relationship, that it's just a bad fit. I remember that we had irreconcilable differences with the registrar. It just wasn't a great fit. And in hindsight, we probably should have sat down and come to an agreement to end the placement early, because neither party was having a good, experience. And it really impacted a fantastic supervisor, to the extent that not only did they take a break, they really questioned whether or not it was something that they wanted to do in the future. And to lose that person as a supervisor would have been a crying shame for the whole profession, because they are amazing. And I'm glad to say that that wasn't the outcome. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that not every placement is going to work. And if you're feeling that way, getting in touch with the college, whichever college it may be, straight away, to talk to somebody. No one wants to see a registrar without a place. We all know that they can't train without a provider number. It's going to take 6 weeks. There's lots of issues. But I think it's really important for both parties that if it's not working, just call it. And that's also really important too, that you do have other supervisors within your practice who can step in and take that load off if it's just not working out with one. If for whatever reason, that team supervision can sometimes take that slack off. But if there's just a personality misfit, don't look at that as a failure. I think that recognising that and showing your vulnerability and saying, hey, this is not working out for us, is actually a strength, and both parties are probably better off.
Thought I had to bring that one up because we don't talk about that much. So I'm going to go around the room and ask everyone what would you say to someone you wanted to invite into the world of supervision? So Kelly, maybe I'll start with you.
I did it not that long ago because I just want to always have more and more and more supervisors in our practice. So I just went up to one of the independent GPs and said, I think you'd be a great supervisor. Is that something you'd be interested in? And, they were really chuffed and said, oh, yeah, it's been something I've kind of always been thinking about, or I haven't got around to, and so on. So I would say just come and join us. That's most fun.
There you go. Leonie?
I'm actually going to read Sarah Ferguson's notes. So Sarah's a GPSA board member. She's an RVTS supervisor, and she's just put in a note to say that she's had to been called to the hospital. She says supervision is stimulating more often than not. It is a fabulous experience, but it is 100% an honour. Please do give it a go. It's a two-way learning opportunity. Supervisors often gain just as much as the registrar, and many say more. So
Awesome.
That's a really lovely sentiment. And I would just say personally, it's lovely to see people grow. It's lovely to know that you've helped them along their career path in a big way or a small way. It's like watching your kids grow up. It's like watching them learn how to do up their shoelaces. You get that nice warm fuzzy feeling inside. And to see the photo of a registrar that you've helped along the way in their gown at their fellowship ceremony is just wonderful. To see them, come back to your practice and then become your boss is even better. But you do get so much more out of it, I think, than what you put in. You just have to remember that on the bad days.
Yep. Sarah?
So I was just going to touch on, a couple of people have mentioned imposter syndrome. And I have decided that as somebody who still suffers from appalling imposter syndrome, that it isn't actually something that's going to go away. And I prefer to wear mine, to see my imposter syndrome as a superpower. It is something that, keeps you real, keeps you on your toes, keeps you understanding that you've got a whole lot to learn. If you're looking to feel comfortable and confident at all times, I think you probably have to think about readjusting your life expectations, because I think a lot of us continue to wonder if we are actually doing a good job. So I say take your imposter syndrome and wear it as a cape. It's one of your superpowers, because it's the thing that keeps you learning, makes you always want to be a little bit better, and which are really important skills to bring to supervision, and they help you help your registrars, but also to help yourself.
Awesome. Converted to a superpower. Nicole?
So I'm chuckling, Sarah, and I'm just looking in the room and thinking of conversations actually I've had with you, with Srishti, and with Karen and Leonie about thinking, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here, and that imposter syndrome is very, very real, and it may not look it on the outside, but we all have it. And I think it's the other thing that keeps us humble and always wanting to learn, wanting to do better. It's also what keeps us linked and networked and wanting to make our profession better and getting over some of the imposter syndrome, but it is still there, and it doesn't matter whichever step you take, it is there, and it always seems to follow. And I think supervision has been the gateway for me personally into lots of other different places and spaces. It's the thing that's given me confidence. It is also the part of my profession that's given meaning and value to who I am and what I do as a clinician. So there are people around you who want to help open those doors for you. Reach out to GPSA, reach out to your local, to your ME, to your SLO, and particularly big cheer out to your SLO and your PLOs, which are practice liaison officers, to actually, if you just want to say, I want to do more, there are people who will go, oh, yes, please. We're always wanting to be able to nurture and grow supervisors, because it is the linchpin or the cornerstone to general practice. So, yep, just stick your hand up and see what happens. And just, if someone says, here, I want to take you there, just say yes or no and.
No and.
Or yes and, whichever way.
Maybe and. Karen?
Oh, look, I think I'll just echo what everyone has said, and my contribution will be, well, why not? Why wouldn't you? After listening to some of the conversation. And if not now, then when? But, people are being tapped on the shoulder virtually at the moment. So how are you going to respond to the call?
Thank you, Karen. Now I'm going to get back to Asma and ask when she's going to be applying, and what, if anything, do you think we've left untouched as an invitation to join supervision in general practice?
I just want to first acknowledge it's been a great conversation, and I think hearing everything has been super inspiring. I think, what the when will be is as soon as I feel ready to get back into work, because there's never going to be a perfect time, so I'm not going to wait for that. As soon as I've got to do it, I've got lots of nods. That's really great. So just when I have to put the first step forward, just do it, and I'm just gonna, yeah. The first day back that's what's going to be on my priority list, is like, let's have a look at the pathways and the paperwork for all those sort of bits and pieces. I think the bottom line is you got to have a go. So that's what I'm taking, is that I'm going to have a go, and let's see where that journey takes me from there.
Absolutely. I remember, and I'm going to hopefully wrap up after this, that the person that got me into supervision said, Srishti, you don't have to be the person that has all the answers, but for a while you'll have to help them find the answers for themselves. And yeah, he's still supervising in a different country, but hopefully what we've done is given people lots of reasons to consider supervision. And I'd genuinely like to thank all of you who have made a contribution to supervision in general practice in so many different ways, to be here and help inspire the next generation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for watching. We'd love your feedback. Please comment or subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates on new videos. If you'd like to ask a question or suggest a topic, you can contact us via our website at gpsa.org.au. GP Supervision Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.